A Monster's Notes. Preface. I long for some circumstance that may assure me that I am not utterly disjointed from my species. These hauntings of the mind, and very tenderly to prove, my dearest Hog, my baby is dead. Will you come, you are so calm a creature, and Shelley is afraid. Into the regions of frost, crushed by fortune, I am nothing. It became necessary that I should conceal myself. But I am not confined to my own identity. I am still here, still thinking, still existing. I shrank from the monster. He held out his hand, but I couldn't touch it. Yours tenderly, your exiled, I am, etc., etc. Adio, cara mia. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Mary Shelley. London, Milan, Naples, Pisa, Marlow, Geneva, Leghorn, Florence, Genoa, Rome, Cadenabia, Paris. The handwriting in gray or chestnut ink, in the early years sometimes accompanied by her husband's. Sometimes the letters are turned sidewise, the text continuing over the first, in the practice of cross-writing to save paper, common in the 19th century. Of her Frankenstein copybooks, the first, Notebook A, as it's now known, survives as 77 leaves of laid paper with a light blue tint and 5 sewing holes along the side. The paper was probably purchased in Geneva. The bindings and covers of all 4 notebooks have long since disappeared. By the time she died of a brain tumor at age 54, 31 years after her husband's drowning, and 37 years after the writing of Frankenstein, erratic, undiagnosed symptoms had mostly kept her from writing for over a decade. Her monster long behind her by then, and all but one of her children long dead. So much of a life is invisible, inscrutable, layers of thoughts, feelings, outward events entwined with secrecies, ambiguities, ambivalences, obscurities, confusions, darknesses strongly present even to the one who's lived it, maybe especially to the one who's lived it. Why should it be otherwise? I didn't seek to find her, wandered instead within and among her fragments of language, notebooks, drafts, journals, fictions, letters, essays, and found their whole worlds like spinning planets, lived in their cold light and burning light, wondering where I was, where they might take me. Curious, I heard a monster's voice, and out of some sharp need I followed. A letter. Dear Mr. Emerson, this is to inform you that the final closing on your building at East 6th Street was successfully completed at 10:15 this morning. I have deposited the check as you instructed. The new owners will begin renovations tomorrow. In our previous communications, I asserted that the structure, now in great disrepair, was completely abandoned. However, yesterday afternoon, as I made my last walkthrough, I found on the 2nd floor a short note, a manuscript wrapped in a rubber band, and an old computer. As these technically belong to you, please let me know if you want them forwarded to your London address. I have not unbound the manuscript, but reproduce for you here the short note left on top. So much blurs. I write, then forget what I write. Walk these streets a stranger to myself and others. Then sometimes it all suddenly flares back. My breath catches, my brain aches. How long have I wandered, talking in my thoughts to the one who made me from dead, discarded things and left me? Why did he need to see me as frightful, misbegotten? I know he'll never hear, never answer. Walking, I remember the other ones as well, those 3 I watched, though none of them could see me. Isn't seeing a wounding and caressing both? All of them gone now, though once I held them with my secret eyes, and in my own way loved them. Mary, Claire, Clerval. All those hours they visited me in air came to me as voices made of flesh, ripe with chains of meaning, though in the end all that's left of them is absence. Why did she need to portray me as she did? For so long I tried not to think of our days in the graveyard, the clicking of pebbles in her hands as she sat near the bushes, listening while I read. Even now the details grow faint. I try to forget, banish it all from my mind, though part of me wants only to remember. She was a child of 9, sitting by her mother's grave. I sat behind the bushes with my books. Once we briefly spoke. Mostly I read to her, that's all. And her half-sister Claire, how strange that she came to me years later, long after I'd been wandering, heading north, far off in the Arctic by then. Why did she need to come to me? Or was it I who needed her? And Clerval, that gentle man who everyone thought dead, in fact, he traveled east as he'd wanted. Even now, I sometimes picture his hand moving in gentle transcription as day after day he translated the dream of the Red Chamber in his house at the foot of Jingzhan Hill and wrote letters to his friend in Asta. Isn't any voice largely mute and partial, even those that speak openly and plainly, though of course I mostly hide? Why do I leave this, these words absorbed into the garbage dumps, the flames? Metropolis. In this section, Mary writes letters to her sister Claire in which she recounts her relationship with the monster. The monster tells his part of the story as well. Dear Claire, now that we live apart and I don't see you face to face anymore, now that all but one of my children have died and your Allegra has died, maybe now I can tell you, but why do I even want to tell you? I was a girl when he came to me. This was before Shelley, before France, Italy, any of it. I would go to her grave, sit there wondering what it would be like to have a mother. I think I have a fever now. Truth burns itself up or goes suddenly, horribly cold. It seems there's no neutrality, no balance, though that's not what they taught us. I think of Socrates with his measured, steady questions. And when I try to feel what thinking is, it's not a series of faithfulnesses, but of betrayals, treasons, crumblings. Remember the ruins at Luna? There's so much extremity in us, outside of us, and we call it the ordinary. We call it, I have become a shallow. This is ordinary. I was a body coming out of another body that died because of my body. This is ordinary. Famine, oppression, slavery, carnage, misunderstanding, hatred, love, sun, hostility, squalor. Why do we think the ordinary is benign? Why do we? I would sit there like an idiot by her grave, waiting for what? I was 8, then 9, some afternoons, some nights. Thought a violent thing to me, in me, though I kept this mostly to myself. I still feel this, that thinking is a violent act, the smoothness of skin a kind of lie. When I heard rustling in the bushes, I wasn't afraid. I'd been sitting there for hours as usual. He stepped mildly toward me, one large hand over most of his face, his head bowed above hunched shoulders. But maybe I should stop this right now, say nothing more. I don't know. So why sign my name at all? And still I sign it. Your sister, Mary. Claire, I sat there in St. Pancras graveyard, the end of summer, the river Fleet moving sluggishly nearby. I don't understand stillness, I was thinking. I remember this clearly, thinking, what could be odder than stillness, though it's everywhere? Rock, bone, knife, death, table. My brain ached as I thought this. I was 9. He moved very slowly, his chin pressed down and inward where it met his left shoulder. This is the cemetery of St. Pancras, I said to myself, and St. Pancras is the patron saint of children, but he couldn't be St. Pancras. His head's still attached, and he's too old. Yet he didn't seem like other humans. Black lips and yellow eyes, long black hair. For weeks he came to me. Mostly he stayed hidden in the bushes, would speak almost nothing of himself, not even when I asked. Read to me from books, seemed to know who I was. It's the ordinary that frightens. Water, rock, stillness, absence, faces, thriving gardens, anchors, skin. For weeks I listened as he read. I thought she must have run away, though when I'd stepped from the bushes she'd seemed calm, unfrightened, even curious. Wouldn't she have quickly reconsidered and then fled? Back within the bushes' cover, I read out loud as I often did to calm myself. I kept many books with me by then. In France they have a dreadful jail, the Bastille. The poor wretches who are confined in it live entirely alone, have not the pleasure of seeing men or animals, nor are they allowed any books. They live in comfortless solitude. Some have amused themselves by making figures on the wall. Others have laid straws in rows. One miserable captive found a spider. He nourished it for 2 years. It grew tame. It partook of his lonely meal. But when the warden learned of this, he crushed the spider. The prisoner looked round his dreary apartment, and the small portion of light which the grated bars admitted only served to show him that he breathed where nothing else drew breath. Loveliest of what I leave behind is sunlight, and loveliest after that the shining stars and the moon's face, but also cucumbers that are ripe, and pears and apples. We are not as hardy, free, or accomplished as animals. Before begging, it is useful to practice on statues. I threw my cup away when I saw a child drinking from his hands at the trough. The greatest beauty of humankind is frankness. I have just completed a 42-day voyage around my room. The fascinating observations I made and the endless pleasures I experienced along the way made me wish to share my travels with the public. After weeks of reading to Mary, the monster suddenly falls mute and disappears. His silence and disappearance haunt them both for the rest of their lives. Claire, this was before Shelley's boat is a beautiful creature, before the reality of my lost life, and grief makes my mind active, before yours entirely, before then he told us the haze of the storm hid them from him, and he saw them no more. When the storm cleared, he looked again, but there was no boat on the sea. Before, so bitterly, Before, I often see both he and dear Edward in dreams. Before, I see no one at all. Even then I grieved, thought maybe I could go to America, its land harsh and unsettled enough to match the brutality of my thoughts. They enslaved people there, brought their cargo of muscles and sinew from the old world to cultivate the new. Their soil was defiled by slavery's miseries and crimes. As I had defiled my own mind, defiled my memories of him, had with my own mind laid waste to myself, my own kindness, burned my own skin. Each night I imagined constructing him, he helpless, strapped down on a table before me, his voice not under his control. I held off giving him a mouth or throat, until I didn't hear the silence of the graveyard anymore, but the brutality of my own imaginings, my need not to have been left. Even as I thought this, part of me still felt he had done nothing wrong, that there was something I could never know, that I was wrong and ignorant to have turned from him and from myself, though I watched my skin grow smoother, whiter, all the while thinking chains and ropes, experiments, scalpels. Years later, when she was no longer alive, I came across this passage in a book I found beneath a bench. We possess nothing in the world. Mere chance can strip us of everything except the power to say, I. There is absolutely no other free act which is given us to accomplish, only the destruction of the I. It went on. Nothing is worse than extreme affliction which destroys the I from outside. So long as we ourselves have begun the process of destroying the I, we can prevent any affliction from causing harm. For the I is not destroyed by external pressure without a violent revolt. At first I felt very confused. Why would it be a good thing to destroy the I? But the more I thought about it, the more I thought back to the graveyard, wondered if what troubled her in part was that I had, in a sense, by the ugliness of my birth, been destroyed from the outside from the start. And she sensed but couldn't say this. I'd been born not out of love but coldness, calculation, maybe even out of hatred. So how could I go back to an untainted beginning from which I could, of my own will, destroy and thus possess myself? Was that why, despite all of Shelley's efforts, she couldn't bear to call me being? Always I was the creature, the fiend, the evil one, the miserable, the monster. In truth, I often shared this revulsion. Was she revealing what she sensed of my beginnings, though she couldn't quite pin down what they had been? Yet she had those notes I dropped in the graveyard. Given who I was and how you made me, why had I even tried to give her comfort? What good could my voice have ever brought to her, and how? Over the years, the monster takes notes on books he reads, information he finds online and elsewhere. When I go to Google and type in this word which seems to define the place you've left me in, this word I want to understand, there aren't so many entries after all. There's a perplexity that has to do with statistical models of speech recognition. This I can't quite understand. And there's a perplexity, which seems to be a game. Perplex City's greatest treasure has been stolen. Explore Perplex City through websites, emails, texts, and live events. Find the cube and claim $100,000 reward. I do my research where I can. I forage, hunt. So I'll begin with Socrates, that self-stinging stingray. He stung himself with questions. For I am not free of perplexity when I make others perplexed, but I am more perplexed than anyone. The meanings of the most common words crumbled under his tongue. Euthyphro said, "But Socrates, I'm simply unable to tell you what I think, for whatever we put forward goes around and refuses to stay where we place it. The way the woods I slept in those first nights now seem to sleep and stir in me, such shudderings in them, such complex shiftings, their small breakages shot through with slippage, doubt. No stillness in me, no shelter I can touch or trust. Yet maybe there's a kind of shelter after all in the way things don't stay still, but turn ripe with possibilities and questionings, the mind untuned, the puzzle shifting, changing. A question is a sight of astonishment. Why has not the universe been used up long ago and vanished away? Aristotle asked. And Gertrude Stein, what is the wind? What is it? How many windows are there in it? What is the difference between ardent and ardently? To smile at the difference. Boundaries blur. A question mark seems too solid and intact a thing, like a peninsula or jar. But what is suppose, what is comfort, what is else and elsewhere and other and difference and alone? Each word rips through itself like water, or journeys forth like brain waves and minute vibrations, curving, casting out. I remember plastic models of the brain, the etched crevices in them, perplexities carved there from the very start. The human mind stands ever in perplexity, wrote Emerson. Thoughts walk and speak and look with eyes at me and make all other teaching formal and cold. I think of you in fever. The more you try to understand, the more your thoughts bent down beneath that weight, reedy, thin, lantern skins flickering. As now, the winds inside me shock the leaning trees, the smallest storms inside my brain releasing. Mind's a perilous place. It knows how each horizon crumbles. And there shall be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth there shall be distress of nations in perplexity at the roar of the sea and rolling waves. O Lord, increase my perplexity concerning thee, wrote Ibn Arabi in the 13th century. He wanted to be guided by bewilderment. There is another prayer. Let me be undone, unsown, disrupted. For perplexity disables the will, disables tyranny. Ibn Arabi retells the story of Noah. In his version, only those who refuse the ark are truly holy. Having turned their backs on Noah's rigid structure, they choose to die instead in the vast waters, the multiplicity that perplexes, as God perplexes. They drown ecstatically in the wider seas. Perplexity lifts the servant out of his servanthood, causes everything to shimmer and change. To be perplexed is to wander truly and well. There is no central place to aim for. And yet, sometimes, I wish for a clear answer, a something that consoles the mind. But maybe the sea can console, how it's not one single thing, but wave upon wave building and dissolving, the way a face wanders through itself all its life, the quiet deluge of its streaming, the bewilderment stitching and unstitching, still some nights when I can't sleep, or days I think of you, or days I'm frightened by my thoughts, the needled wings inside my fingers, my heart. Augustine ended his confessions with a puzzle. The last word he chose, a Perietur, meaning will be or shall be opened. Those who transcribed his text later altered its ending to Amen, as if to shut that perplexing door he had left open. Disquietude, perplexity, the words perhaps, will be, and shall be opened, endless space. Some nights I dream I'm in the sea, cold slits of light on miles and miles of viscous black. The water's full of doors, opening and shutting, soft fins or lungs that somehow function underwater. The burlap sack I wear, stitched through with every letter of the alphabet, bulges out from my body, then flaps back, then bulges out again as the letters begin to disintegrate and then drift off, drift away, until I'm alone and drowned but still breathing among the many scattered letters, each gash and sway of them traveling far from the built systems, the built world. Dream of the Red Chamber. In this section, the monster clairvoyantly watches Victor Frankenstein's friend, Henry Clerval. Clerval has made his way to China, where he spends his days translating the classic work Dream of the Red Chamber by Gao Zhejin and reading letters from a man he briefly met in Italy. This man, who suffers from leprosy, has refused to tell Clerval his name, though he writes to him of his condition and of a sister he may or may not have, who also suffered from the disease and died before him. Clerval writes back to him but never sends what he writes. Following are a few letters from Clerval's friend in Italy and one from Clerval. My friend, there have always been captives of one sort or another. Why should I be an exception? Skin is a secret the mind's imaginings wander through unguided. A testing ground, a laboratory, a field. Law speaks only angles into justice. My watchfulness is chained to who I am. The sun is very bright today. I went into her room again today. I always go in now. It smells of sun, but how could it smell of the sun, of clothes freshly drying? In her notebook there are many blank pages and many half-filled. Many break off in mid-sentence. What is the grammar of thought that doesn't want to complete itself, that doesn't believe in completion? Plutarch wrote of the Athenians tattooing their Samian prisoners with the sign of their ship. But to reduce the body to one thing, the self to one thing, one single mark, there's such cruelty in that. My skin grows more elaborate, more complex, becomes a new language there's no sovereign of, belongs to no kingdom, there's no one it bows down to or serves, no civilization, no penal code or slave system it moves through, branded with its single barren mark. But then the doctor's words come back: interstitial fibrosis, septic absorption, atropine sulfate, acid tartaric, treatment of, description of. On one page near the end of her notebook, she wrote the words radical joy. My friend, you write to me of your home, and I wish that I could write to you of mine, but I'm not sure what my home is. Is it this mud brick house in a dusty village half the world away from the place of my birth? Or is it, as I often think it is, this book, the dream of the Red Chamber, which I live in day and night, or so it seems? I move among its gardens, its pathways, intrigues, its many words and seasons. I listen to Bao Yu and Dao Yu and to their relatives and servants as they go on with their lives. But really, it's all strange to me. I am, and will always remain, an outsider. There's a character in the book, Mao Yu, a young nun who calls herself the one outside the threshold. I find it very beautiful that she calls herself this. She lives in poverty in green lattice nunnery and refuses to shave her head, though this is the required practice among nuns. She learns to read and write, teaches characters to the poor, but lives mostly in silence. Her tea is made with rainwater and snow gathered from plum branches she keeps buried in a jar. If a valuable bowl comes into her possession, she gives it away. Everyone calls her eccentric. By the end of several thousand pages, she comes to great sorrow, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The one outside the threshold, could this be your name? You speak of your leper's hood, your cloak, of the contagion of body and mind. You speak of the brother and sister who walked in the garden, never seeing each other's face, of the ones in town who you watch as from an unbridgeable gap, a separateness as strong as the Great Wall. You who'll never enter their world, who won't cross, the openings close to you. And yet to be outside the threshold, surely there's a kind of opening in that. Mao Yu felt this. She walked the woods alone, wrote greetings on secret pieces of paper she tucked into walls, combed her long hair, didn't want to be like the others, to have what they had, to think the way they thought. Would you think I leave out too much pain and conflict in my account of her? Or that she chose and you didn't choose? I wish you could tell me that your face were here before me, though I know this is something you don't want. I think of you and of the garden we talked in, the garden you tend. Your friend, as ever, Clerval. Ice Diary. In this section, the monster has fled to the Arctic, where he experiences visions of Claire Clairmont, half-sister of Mary Shelley, whose young daughter, Allegra, has died in a convent at the age of 4. Claire, too, has gone north to work as a governess in Moscow. Following is one short piece in which the monster recalls watching Claire and addresses Victor Frankenstein, and another in which Claire addresses Mary and her other sister, Fanny, who died a suicide years before. All those times she came to me behind my closed eyes or in front of my open, waiting eyes, I didn't hear her speak, yet I forgot she wasn't speaking, each word vivid, present as my breath, as if I were hearing every word inside her brain as she wrote it, each pen scratch, each footstep, every feeling she had of safety or danger. Now a quiet fire spreads inside my brain. My own heart beats too loud. Is this what Franklin heard when he realized he'd never return? This stripped, peculiar quiet, present as anything. This colorless burn. The ones who walked barefoot over snow, having lost even their shoes, is this what they heard? And the ones who lay final and shivering in their frozen clothes. I feel the quiet of you too, that colorless, lost place in me where once I almost knew you. No hand alights. I lose myself in whiteness, air. Fanny, Mary, my fever's broken. Moscow's still covered with snow. In winter, all distance turns inward, differentiation vanishes. I need to grow strong and healthy like I used to be. I don't understand how tenderness invents itself, but that it does. Lost and unknown when clothed in words, Locke wrote, yet this is the only way I have to reach you. Each day I mount a stranger's stairs. The world is closed in silence to me. I have told myself this again and again, but maybe I'm wrong. Think of what the northern explorers felt when color flooded back into their world. Still, so many of them never returned, or returned only partly, damaged, sullen, numb. For 4 years I've lived among strangers. I thought consolation was what I needed, but now I don't know. I keep thinking I have this splinter in my eye, and at first it bothered me, the way it interfered, black line through every face, each wall, each door, a caught piece of turbulence lodged inside my sight forever. But it's become just a part of seeing, and I find now I don't mind it. What's wholeness anyway, and why did I formerly think of it as something to be prized? Remember the ruins at Luna, how we loved them? The other night I dreamed a pair of surgical scissors was cutting our red dresses into strips. And it wasn't a bad dream. That's what amazed me. It wasn't bad at all. The floor all covered with those strips, a mess of red. I think of you. There are so many conflagrations of mind, so many, I don't know how to say it, turbulence, ruin. More and more I feel myself climbing a rope of turmoil and peace, each rough strand inextricably bound to the other, intertwined with the other. Know that I think of you, the two of you, wherever you are. The last consolations are torn away. Notes on the Earth seen from space. Over and over the word fragile. It looks so fragile, so delicate, that if you touched it with a finger, it would crumble and fall apart. This from James Irwin, crew member of Apollo 15. Astronaut Lauren Acton spoke of seeing it, contained in the thin, moving, incredibly fragile shell of the biosphere. To Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space, the Earth looked touchingly alone. And when Vitaly Sevastyanov was asked by ground control what he saw, he replied, "Half a world to the left, half a world to the right, I can see it all. The Earth is so small." Neil Armstrong said, "I put up my thumb and shut one eye, and my thumb blotted out the planet Earth. I didn't feel like a giant. I felt very, very small." And Ulf Meerwald, "For the first time in my life, I saw the horizon line as curved, accentuated by a thin seam of dark blue light. I was terrified by its fragile appearance." Is this what frightened you? Is this what you sought to combat and to flee? This fragility, this somehow knowledge, even then before anyone had ever left the earth or seen it from a distance, of how small it is and delicate, as we are too, how finite, how beside the point, how fleeting. Might this account partly for my monstrous proportions, as if you were building a shield, a fortress of flesh, as if the vertiginous wings of blood in us could somehow be made to tremble less. But I am a blunt and narrow piece of materiality, imprinting and imprinted, as were you. Footprints, strands of broken hair dropped here and there. On March 18, 1965, Alexei Leonov exited the main capsule of Voskhod 2 by pushing himself headfirst out of the opening. A 16-foot lifeline held him to the ship. If it broke, he would drift off forever. Although the spacecraft traveled at great speed, there was no air rushing past him to let him feel it. He spun slowly for 10 minutes. But when the co-pilot Bayev told him to come back, he didn't want to return. He didn't want to return, and yet it seems a lonely thing, that feeling of nothing pushing back. Several months later, Edward White walked in space for 20 minutes, though the term's deceptive, as the motion is a free fall or floating. Seen from 120 miles away, Earth was nearly featureless. When he returned to the spaceship, he had lost 5 kilograms of body mass, and 2 kilograms of perspiration had collected in his boots. But he too didn't want to return to the capsule. When told to come back to the spacecraft, he said, "This is the saddest moment of my life." His co-pilot pulled him back in. And you will work in sorrow the fields, as if your laboratory were a field, a wound always to be worked, a not quiteness or rivenness of mind needing to be healed. But when he floated there, in that region without weight or mass or shadow, all fields fell away, all shattering turned soft and pliant, as if there were no need any more either to build or to destroy. But how my mind builds and destroys you over and over. On January 27, 1967, 2 years after his spacewalk, Edward White died in a fire at Launch Complex 34 on the Cape Canaveral Air Station. He had entered Apollo 1 for a simulated countdown, along with Command Pilot Grissom and Pilot Roger Chaffee, when the fire broke out. Years later, White's wife took her own life. How strange to see the earth from the sky and then come back, to float in space like that, barely tethered, earth a modest, uncrowned thing. So peaceful and so fragile, one called it. The size of a marble or a pearl hanging delicately, said another, and another, but I did not see the great wall. Still, there are many practicalities to be addressed, as you would have known even from your rudimentary laboratory. It's a very sobering feeling to be up in space and realize that one's safety factor was determined by the lowest bidder on a government contract, the astronaut Alan Shepard pointed out. And Neil Armstrong spoke of a feeling that was complex, unforgiving. Lyndon Johnson said, "It's too bad, but the way the American people are, now that they have all this capability, instead of taking advantage of it, they'll probably just piss it away." But what would it mean to take advantage? And what of how small and of how fragile? Over and over the word fragile describing this world that has taught me such resistance, the heart of it and brutal and yet still. Numerous inventions made for space have been adapted by private industry, resulting in such things as studless snow tires, scratch-proof eyeglasses, white needed to shield his eyes from the extreme glare of sunlight, the 5-year flashlight and cordless power hand tools. The U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation was formed in the 1990s as a major component of a redevelopment master plan designed for Titusville's urban waterfront. There you can visit the gift shop at the museum and treat yourself, a friend, or a relative to a truly unique space-related gift. When Leonov and White floated in space, they didn't want to come back. They couldn't have known this beforehand. And what is a footstep then after that, and the feeling of earth so fragile, so small beneath a shoe, or the thin tether of breath, or a name, or a day, a boundary, a theory, a bond?